So now we move to the last and not least presentation, which we saved for the end, because usually when companies want to do re-engineering, digital transformation, anything, you need to focus at five elements: your people, your process, your technology, governance, and change management. So basically, what we learned from Dr. Eric today was talking a lot about how people, process, technology, everything should be integrated together. Later, when we met Natalie helped us to see process mining inside the process using technology, how you can connect everything together, and how we can look at the process from different perspectives, the data generated, analyze it, link it, even do task mining and do robotic process automation after you do the process discovery. Now we had a fantastic presentation from Jesse showing us the governance, how you can take good care of your company transformation journey strategy using digital technology. And remains a very important part is your people, your change management. You need to take good care of your people, as Jesse mentioned, and everyone. So how can we think about Industry 4.0 where some of our people at people 1.0? And it's caused by management who don't help their people to change and put the right strategy. That's why we have Jennifer. So I would like to welcome Jennifer today, because it's very important that we talk about our people. Part of the change is our people. So how we can manage the change management, how we can manage everything. So Jennifer, you are welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's always impressive to have you with us. So stage is yours.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor and a privilege to be with you all here today and to share a topic that really is near and dear to my heart. And it is the ways in which we actually do enable people through this change. So as we start to talk about this topic, it's really one that I feel is incredibly important to us as we are in an era of change, and as we start to think about the ways in which our processes and our equipment are changing, it's very important for us to proactively prepare our people for that future. So part of my passion that drives my work really has to do with the ways in which we actually create the environment for people to really thrive. I work a lot with mainly complex organizations that are going through automation and related transformations from a digital perspective. And my role is really to come alongside the organization and really create and cultivate a very dynamic ecosystem that allows people to really thrive. We really strive to create an environment that captivates and catapults people forward with an acknowledgement that change is coming. So let's take a look at that for a few moments here. So as we look at our changing world, there are quite a few things happening. This slide really represents the mega trends that we see predicted between the years 2020 and 2030. This was actually compiled by a gentleman named Peter Fisk, and you can see on the slide some of the different sources that he compiled around this. But it's really quite interesting because we find ourselves today in the year 2021. So we're already in the midst of this changing world. And this is really looking at the changes that we see today and that we expect to see by the year 2030, which is coming very quickly. So we see things happening in our world that impact people and impact people in organizations. Shifting economic power, so emerging markets, developing economies, definitely a huge part of our world as we see it today. Climate change and resource scarcity, Lots going on there that we have to keep into account and really start to think about how we're changing our world, the ways that we work, and the people within them. Technological breakthrough, we've talked a lot about that today with regards to breakthroughs in the technology space. Lots of talk around AI and machine learning. That'll come into play as we talk about the people pieces throughout this presentation. And then also demographics and social change. We know that our world is changing, that the population density, education levels, social change are all a big part of what's going on in our world economy. And it's definitely important to keep in mind as well. And then rapid urbanization. So we see global migration to megacities. There are challenges and opportunities that emerge as a result of that. All in all, lots of change that not only impacts our organizations, our industries, but also very much so the people within it. So as we start to shift from looking at our changing world to our changing work, this is a great piece of work that was actually put together back in 2018 by the McKinsey Global Institute. There's a lot of great information in this report, and I would definitely recommend that you take a look at it. The information that I have on the screen is specific information that came from the energy and mining sector. So this was actually change that was predicted by the year 2030, once again, with regards to the energy and mining industries. There are other industries also covered in this report, but I think energy and mining is an interesting one. It's definitely an area where I focus my expertise and has a lot of relevancy to lots of members of this audience. When we look at sector skill shifts by 2030, you can kind of see the change in hours in the types of work that people are doing on the left-hand side of the image. And then on the right side, we see whether skills are decreasing or increasing by the year 2030. And this is the change in actual hours of the type of work happening. So we see a decrease in the things that have made up a lot of the work within a lot of these industries traditionally: general equipment operation, general equipment repair, craft and technician skills, all of those things starting to decline. In energy and mining in particular, you see some of the things listed on the screen, and I think it's very relevant with regards to some of the other conversations that my colleagues have spoken about previously today. Less around inspecting and monitoring skills by human beings, and less around basic data input and processing. Obviously, as we start to automate, those things are no longer taking up as much of our time, and they don't really require as much from a skill set perspective. However, when we look at the increasing skills, they're really the skills that make us human: creativity, complex information processing and interpretation, entrepreneurship, initiative taking, leadership, managing others. There are some pieces around advanced IT skills and programming, and also basic digital skills in this particular industry that we're looking at today. So we know our world is changing. We know the work is changing. And furthermore, our workforce is changing. This is actually data from that same report, giving us an idea with regards to how our workforce is projected to change between now and 2030. Obviously, we see some mindset shifts. So really needing to establish a culture of lifelong learning and development. We've got a lot of transition to get through and a lot of additional skill set to gain. And so that mindset shift, that you learn a trade and it never changes and you never have to change the nature of your work, is really not the reality anymore. We need a lifelong learning culture. We also need to look at this concept of new collar jobs. And this is really talking about different skill levels being required for different jobs as we go forward. This won't be static. It will continue to change. We'll continue to see new jobs emerge, change, morph into something else as we go forward. So definitely something to think about. Our workforce composition obviously also changing. with a booming gig economy, and lots of independent contractors and freelancers, kind of like myself at the moment, that are working in roles within organizations on complex projects. Organizational structures, obviously, gone are the days where we have a very hierarchical fixed structure that doesn't move or change. We anticipate that our organizations and the ecosystems within them will continue to produce very malleable and dynamic structures, which is a challenge when we look at traditional models, as well as C-suite and HR changes, obviously, with regards to all of the changes that we talked about, but a different mindset from CEOs, from C-suite, from talent professionals, really looking at the ways in which, once again, we can accommodate these changes in our workforce and really accelerate people so that they're more efficient and more engaged than ever before. So in this presentation today, we'll look briefly at 3 main points that hopefully will help us all to start to think a little bit differently with regards to how we're structuring our organizations, the people within them, and what types of opportunities we're giving people that are really proactively preparing them for the future of work and Industry 4.0. So the first one is really reduction in variation in processes. We talk about this a lot with regards to equipment and business processes. We're going to talk about it with relation to the ways in which we engage our workforce as well. Then we'll talk a little bit about recognizing the diversity in people. People are a little bit interesting, whereas we want to reduce our variation in processes and equipment, we actually want to recognize, celebrate, and really use as a strategic advantage the diversity that exists in our workforce, because gone is the concept of an organization that's static and fixed and doesn't move. This will help us to really reimagine the workforce in a few really innovative ways that I'll share at the end of this presentation. So as we start to talk about reducing variation, there's a few things that are really helpful as you start to think about this as an organization. I work with a lot of organizations and entities that are in the process of figuring out how to do this. But it really has to do with making standards in processes, equipment, and parameters accessible to people. One size doesn't fit all. So even if I'm unifying or harmonizing different processes within my organization, I have to be able to communicate those and engage my workforce around those. And I need different strategies to be able to engage different parts of the workforce based upon their geography, their educational background, the type of work that they do. So we'll talk a little bit about that. One of the ways to really think about this is to continuously describe the work that's being done, not just a fixed org structure, and to do that in a consistent way in which you can categorize risk and define measurable operational targets associated with the change. One of the other pieces that we look to be able to do is to continuously define capabilities by discipline, not job title. We already discussed that job titles will no longer be fixed and static. They will move and morph. And there's a different strategy that organizations can utilize to be able to deal with that we'll look at briefly. We also want to be able to maintain multiple scenarios simultaneously. What does that mean? Well, really, if I'm looking at my organization and the ways in which I need to prepare people for change and also start to implement that change, different scenarios may come up. Some of them are strategies that I've planned for as an organization. There may be particular markets that my organization is wanting to enter, or just different ways in which the business is developing, in which we want to make sure that people are prepared and skilled ahead of time. But there are also scenarios that come up that we don't control. COVID would be a great example of that. It's important to scenario plan for things that may happen and how the workforce is going to be engaged, what type of work they're going to be doing, and what skills are required, so that once again, we don't wait until an unexpected scenario takes place and then start to figure out how to engage people around the work that they need to do. We can use reusable objects that are multimodal and multi-channel. I'll talk about what that means in a moment. And then really deploy all of this into the flow of work so that people can actually access all of this information and these experiences while they're doing their job, rather than stopping work and reducing productivity to go be retrained, which we certainly don't have time for in the scenario that we're in today. Let's talk a little bit too about tracking behaviors via an open standard called XAPI, and I'll explain a little bit of what that means and what that looks like. So as we start to talk about capability expectations, and really that idea that the organization is malleable at this point, it's dynamic, it no longer is static and fixed. There are many different ways to handle this and many different strategies that I work with different organizations to make this possible. However, I want to bring up that there's lots of technology in the people space that can enable you around this. One of the examples that you see on the screen here really talks about utilizing artificial intelligence and human validation in combination to actually look at all of the capability that may be required now and in the future for organizations, and really start to scan broadly. Anything, patents, publications, parallel industries, ecosystems, to really get some insight from the AI with regards to skills that are required. This is a very different model than sitting in a conference room and kind of whiteboarding what skills we think people need. AI allows us to build models very, very quickly and to keep them dynamically fresh and evergreen and changing, so that we're always ahead of the game in terms of enabling the workforce. Another piece of this really has to do with how those capabilities are organized and how they can be reused and applied in different scenarios. We talked a little bit about this before, but certainly once again, the technology is there to allow you to actually build out capability models for the workforce for different scenarios and strategies that may play out in the future. So that once again, you can constantly see your organization against these strategies or scenarios before they take place, and really ensure that the workforce is adequately prepared. One of the other ways to think about this has to do with the ways in which we get information to people that help them to do their jobs in different ways. I talked about the idea that we want to come alongside them in the flow of work and actually give them access to standard operating procedures, to anything that they need, really, even if that's remote operation assistance. One of the other pieces of technology that's very relevant in this space is really, in this case, learning content management systems and things of that nature that allow for reusable objects, whereby I can take the same standard operating procedure or work instruction or what have you, and actually put it in people's hands and in different ways, whether that's in training scenarios, in the form of, standard operating procedures, online foundations, or even instructor-led courses, but also in continuous environments that go along the flow of work. So more around communities of practice, as well as contextualized learning on the equipment that people are already operating, whether that be from a kiosk in more of a contextualized help type of situation, or on the equipment itself with regards to helping people access the steps and work instructions or schematics that they need to do their jobs. There's also a hybrid area around this, around augmented and virtual reality, that allow us to really put people in simulated scenarios and or guided scenarios in the flow of their work. And so that's a piece that's really important here as well. The goal here is really not to create these objects separately. So for organizations that prior to COVID, we're creating training materials separate from continuous learning materials, separate from hybrid types of development materials. They saw a lot of challenges with regards to COVID, and probably still do today. There's lots of technology and processes to put in place to ensure that that doesn't happen, that you build stuff one time and version it out, and it automatically goes out in all of these different formats and all of these different ways, so that there's really no lack of equity between experience, regardless of how people are experiencing them. One example is listed here on the screen, and this is essentially one that shows an example around a single source augmented reality. So in many cases, I work with organizations around the ways in which those standard operating procedures and remote operations assistance can be in the flow of work. We can do this through a variety of different mechanisms, but in many cases, we want that to be hands-free. So in this scenario, you see how this is working in the sense that we have those hard hat mounted displays whereby colleagues can actually access schematics and or work instructions in the flow of work, and even share that experience with remote subject matter experts that can see what they see, annotate the environment, and send communication back and forth to those colleagues so that they can really learn how to do that complex decision making that we see more and more as we start to automate some of the other tasks that people did before. There's an important standard that I want to share with you all. And for those of you that are interested, I'm happy to give you more information about this offline. But I wanted to introduce this to you because if you're not utilizing this for your people-based systems, this is an incredibly useful tool, and it is an open source standard. So this is the Experience API. And really what the Experience API is meant to do is track user behavior and really learner behavior within an operational context. So what this is really doing is we're looking at tracking people's behavior and the ways in which we shape their behavior and their behavior changes through XAPI. What XAPI does is it has a pretty basic syntax. There's lots of extensions around it. The premise behind it really though is that we're tracking the person or the group of people, the action that they take in the environment, whether it's a simulated environment or a real world environment. Do they turn certain dials? Do they consult certain experts? Do they resolve certain issues? What is it exactly that they do? And what object are they acting upon, or what piece of equipment or process at the time in which this all takes place? We can also include lots of extensions around this, having to do with the results that happen as a result of that action being taken by that individual, and even the operational context. Does the context change as a result of human intervention or interaction? So those are all pieces that are very relevant as well. Here's an example of this in a virtual reality scenario, and it's really kind of nice because we're actually putting people in simulated environments and then measuring their behavior so that we can actually start to prepare people for taking that action in a real world scenario. This happens to be actually closing a hatch in a processing plant. And you can kind of see in what we're tracking from XAPI, we can actually see the person, what they did. So in this case, they closed a mud hatch. And we have that exact information both in the simulated environment, but also potentially in the real world environment if we do have those heads up displays on hard hats as people and colleagues are working through their jobs. Really quickly, just to give you an idea of what's possible here, this is kind of a case study that goes through a bit around how this looks different than what we would have expected traditionally around people, data, and systems. So this is a wonderful VR virtual reality case study. This piece of virtual reality was fantastic in terms of giving colleagues an opportunity to be in a processing environment and notice any kind of risks that they might come across. However, the data itself was very limited. It was basically based upon, who went through the interaction, how long it took them, and, what kind of score they got at the end. That doesn't tell us much about behavior or how we're shaping or changing behavior. By utilizing an XAPI format, we're actually able to look at the actions that they took in the interaction. So in this case, in a medium risk context, what actions did people actually take? Where did they identify things? Where did they ignore things? Did they stop work? What kinds of actions did they actually take? And then furthermore, what incorrect actions did they take in certain contexts and certain failed barriers from a risk perspective, all the way down to where do they show evidence of building competence in a particular environment or in a particular work instruction, what have you. So lots of opportunity here. And once again, open data standards. So things to look for with regards to the partners that you're utilizing in the space from a technology perspective. This is also very relevant in in more of our human skills. Some people would have referred to this as soft skills previously, but we can also measure and track these types of things from an XAPI perspective around what actions people take with other human beings in different scenarios, and apply that once again to the skills that people need as we move into the future. Those human skills are incredibly important. Furthermore, we can start to personalize the experience, and this is kind of at the heart of where we're aiming for here. So as we start to look at this, we can actually take into account a user's profile, their actual skills that they already possess, and modify scenarios and experiences for them ahead of time to help accelerate their potential to grow them in the areas in which they need to grow, instead of having everyone go through the same experience every time. Speaking of the fact that people are different, I want to speak a little bit about recognizing diversity. This is a huge piece, and it's incredibly important to acknowledge that people are the strategy of a sustainable organization, so we need to make them visible. There are ways to do that in terms of curating capabilities, linking continuous feedback to performance measures, as well as keeping our capability expectations evergreen and fully transparent, and really getting into a real-time capability development perspective where we can actually correlate experiences that people have in the workplace to the building of capability, as well as really engage in some meaningful strategic workforce planning and recruiting. So the last 100 years, our technology has pretty much looked like this. We've had some kind of example of a CV or a resume with some information around what we think we need to know about our workforce. The challenge, though, is we don't get rich data necessarily from this, and even our technology that's pulling out keywords from these types of documents are really not getting at the heart of the skill set and the capability that people actually possess. An example of this came from some work that I did in a mining context, in which we actually gave people the opportunity to talk about their oral histories and just to talk to us about who they are and what makes them them. This is actually the same person, scrub data again from the previous image, and we start to see many different things emerge in this kind of information and input that we never would get from a traditional document that we've asked for in the space. So there's lots of great technology that you can utilize around this as well, and I work with some organizations around how to do this. But essentially, we can use AI and human validation again to actually dynamically build people's capability profiles, whereby we're getting tons of input around capability from a person and the people that work with them on a day-to-day basis, whereby we can actually see real-time capability development happen versus more of a static 360 type of survey that has a heavy cost, a heavy uplift, and really doesn't give us data fast enough to know if people are on the right trajectory or trend in terms of actually developing ahead of change. It's important to look at continuous feedback loops and the ways in which people can give one another feedback in terms of the skills that they see them demonstrating. A lot of organizations are shifting to a continuous feedback method of performance management, because once again, it gives us those data points to actually see how people are growing and developing in the flow of work, and actually see potentially on a day-to-day basis, their skills start to increase and change. We also want to link those to experiences, whereby we can personalize those experiences for our colleagues so that they really have the opportunity to get exactly what they need at the time that they need it. We can even start to look through AI around potential skills, inferring if a group of people or an individual have skill A and skill B, we might be able to accelerate them into skill C much, much faster, rather than kind of doing a keyword search and looking for skill C, which isn't necessarily the most efficient way to go about doing that. We can also start to look at our organizational view, current and future states against those scenarios, and start to form a view as to how prepared we are for the future from a people perspective. There's lots of predictive and comparative analytics associated with that, whereby you can see real-time capability development and correlate that back to the experiences that you've made available for people to see if we're trending in the right direction. And then furthermore, really looking at this idea of a capability-based organizational development scheme, whereby we're incorporating capability into recruiting and application tracking systems, as well as performance management in the flow of work, and really getting into that strategic workforce planning and global mobility, whereby we can actually see our workforce, where the strengths are, who we can accelerate the most quickly, and where they can serve a role in a dynamically changing organization. Which really kind of gets me to the last and final thoughts that I want to share with you all today, which has to do with reinventing the workplace. This really speaks a lot to how we continue to evolve equipment, processes, and people along the way, and the ways in which we can actually utilize operational parameters and really process and people data to trigger specific personalized intervention points for people and correlate that workforce capability to process improvement. So this is an image that is familiar to a lot of the organizations that I work with, because we start to really look at a few main pieces. One, how organizational capability is managed and how content or experiences are managed within the organization, and the ways in which those can work together and be streamlined. The part I want to really draw to your attention here, as we start to look at the next couple of slides that follow, is the tealish areas at towards the top and middle of your screen. So we have this idea of user-managed capability profiles, whereby we can actually look at a user's capability profile and IoT inputs around trend limits associated with equipment and processes, and actually get people exactly what they need at the time that they need it, and correlate that to operational and process-based resolutions that take place because of that human intervention. And once again, because we have that XAPI as a data source, we can actually look at the actions that the individual took in real time and the resolution from an IoT perspective, potentially around the equipment or process, and correlate those things together with regards to human intervention, actually improving an operational process, and also skill development taking place in real time. So as we start to transition to the possibilities and what can come from all of this, this is an area that I focus a lot on with regards to the ways in which we continue to improve as organizations and from an operational excellence perspective. So when we get to the point in which we have IoT data and people data that's based around continuously changing capability, we can actually marry those things together and actually look at operational data from an IoT perspective, along with a personalized capability profile, and really get to the operator or someone in proximity and give them exactly what they need at the time that they need it to improve an operational process and or to continue to develop their own skill profile based upon where they need to go next. And all of that kind of takes place in that XAPI data that we talked about before. So in this scenario, we can actually look at a world in which we can see an operational process trending out of limits. We can see an operator or someone in proximity that can help to resolve that operational process and not allow it to trend out of limits by taking an action. Give them exactly the experience that they need to take that action, and then track the action that they took and the results or operational context as it resolves, which really gets us to the point in which we've come full circle and we really can develop people within context and within the flow of work. So I'll leave you with this last piece. It's just a big part of the work that I do and really motivates a lot of the work in the space. And this is from Jim Rohn. Basically says, the big challenge is to become all that you have the possibility of becoming. You cannot believe what it does to the human spirit to maximize your human potential and stretch yourself to the limit. And I really hope that I've given you a few thoughts around the ways in which we can maximize that human potential and really proactively prepare people for the future of work. I'm always available for any additional questions or for any collaboration around any of these topics. It's a big part of my work and what drives a lot of the activity in the space with regards to people innovation.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's amazing. It's
Thank
very
you.
Thank you, thank you. But I have a question for you. How do you get the data from people when you talk about connecting and monitoring people reaction? How do you do it?
Right. So there's a variety of different ways to do it, and it depends upon the work that you're doing and the industry that you're in. So I talked a little bit around the ideas that have to do with looking at actions that people are taking through that XAPI data format. Once again, it is an open source data format, and it really can work in any kind of context, whether you're working in software or on a screen or in a hands-on scenario, whereby we're actually looking at the actions that people took based upon what they manipulate in the space. Do they manipulate an object? Do they click on a field? Do they enter a field? All of those things can be accommodated through that data format. And then that data goes into a learning record store, whereby we can see everything that our colleagues are doing and the actions that they're taking and how it relates to the operational context. For organizations that have advanced IoT, it's even better because we can actually look at the IoT data around the operational context prior to an individual taking action and then afterwards to show a resolution. But even for our organizations that are not quite there yet, we can definitely look at the actions that people are taking and correlate that back to operational processes, to KPIs, to all of those pieces. So definitely a way to integrate that in. Because it's an open and flexible data source, there's a lot of different ways to capture that based upon the types of technology and the types of work that are happening. And happy to discuss that with colleagues.
It's interesting. Thank you very much. And it's a great thing to show how you can monitor people, reflect on that. So I would like to thank everyone today who has been with us. It has been amazing sessions, and it has been very fruitful. I hope you all had good learnings today. I learned a lot. Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing XAPI. That's really amazing and impressive. Okay.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be here with such esteemed colleagues.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. We thank you for your time. We thank you for spending your weekend with us today, right? So where are you staying exactly in the US?
For me, I am in Houston, Texas.
So you're 7 hours, difference.
Yes.
yeah. So it's your time. So thank you for spending, and happy Halloween, by the way. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So it's great. Many sessions to come. We look forward that we will invite you again for more webinars to share with us the progress. I'm so curious because when you talk about mining, it's not easy in mining. So.
Right. But also it's a situation in which there's a lot of opportunity. Automation is something that's very relevant to the mining space. And as we start to look at the ways in which people need to be supported to do work in a different way, it's a very relevant topic for the industry.
Yeah, but the problem was connectivity in mining.
Yes.
Is easy. So I'm personally curious to have a session with you.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, let's talk about it for sure. There are lots of great strategies with regards to the ways in which to make that work. Obviously, great conversations between colleagues in enterprise architecture and roadmaps. I've always found that having those conversations and kind of understanding what we need to do from a people and strategic perspective is always helpful, because we can start to look at the ways in which we're implementing technology at different sites and start to bring the people part in from the beginning, so that we've got a good idea of when the infrastructure will be built and how it will be utilized appropriately.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how technology, everything we do, yeah, it's fascinating. So we hope we have another chance with you to share with some of your success stories, because I think it's amazing. Okay, and I'm very excited about this XAPI because it will give great insights to everyone.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you everyone who choose to spend the weekend with us to learn Thanks to Dr. Eric, who joined from Far East in Australia, and it's already past a bit now. At his side. Thanks to Jennifer. Thanks for Jesse. Thanks for Natalie joining.